while ago, I showed you several capacitors, resistors, and even a diode that I replaced. So I replaced this diode here, and I replaced it by a 1N4007. I also replaced the resistor which was here, and that used to be a 10K, and I replaced it by a 12K resistor. Okay, so that I did. And then I also replaced these two capacitors, both 50 nanofarads. Now you'll remember this one was bigger than this one, and the reason for that was that the original capacitor was rated for 250 volts here and only 50 volts here. But since I used two newer capacitors rated for 400 volts, they are both the same size now. So I use grossly overrated capacitors to replace the original ones. But hey, I don't think that can do a lot of harm. Now, the interesting thing is this. At least if I can make it focus. Okay. This capacitor here, this brown one, had me sort of confused. I really had no idea what capacitor that could be. And so I started looking on the service manual. And if you take a close look at the service manual, you'll see on the service manual the capacitor right here. Okay, so right next to this coil, which is in fact this one. Okay, so if I put the print board in the same orientation as the service manual, then this capacitor here, okay, is the one you see over here. Okay, now if we follow up the line that points to it, so we go up and up and up and up and up, it says C32. Okay, C32. Right, so now let's look at the schematic. Now, if you look closely at the schematic, and we're looking at the horizontal drive part of the circuitry, okay, then you'll see right here C32, and indeed it is marked as a 1 microfarad polarized capacitor. The fact it had me confused was that it looked suspiciously like a regular paper cap, I could say, or well, you know, something like this. Okay, so it had me a bit confused. Okay, so I decided that it might not be a bad idea to replace this one, because, well, I'm having issues, as you well know, with the horizontal linearity. So yeah, well, I'll replace this one for a brand new 1 microfarad capacitor, a polarized one, obviously. Okay, then I want to show you one more thing that I did, and I did not give you a clear image last time of it. Remember the small power transistor I replaced here, something like this, okay? So I replaced the small power transistor that was mounted here by a BD139, which has a TO126 housing. So you could say a rectangular housing. And I carefully bent the base and emitter pins, which you see here, to fit right straight through the holes of the power transistor. And then I cut the collector pin, and I'll tell you why. Actually, at the back of a BD139 there is a metal back, okay, a metal plate, and it seems that the metal plate at the back of a BD139 is connected through to the collector internally. So I don't really need the collector pin, just like the original transistor didn't use it, and I wrapped the BD139 in a little bit of aluminum foil, which I carefully kept crumpled on the back. And then I screwed it tightly to its cooling plate, which is also aluminum. So now electrically the BD139's collector and the cooling plate are connected through. And then I connected the cooling plate via a small screw which held down the original power transistor to the circuitry below, you know. So if you take a look at the screw, well, there you are. Okay, so here is the screw and the little nut that holds it down. So electrically, the collector of the replacement transistor is in fact connected through via the cooling plate you see here. Okay, so just like the original power transistor, something like this. Alright, so I just wanted to show you how I had repaired it. Ammonia stinks, so if you want to use it, you better use it outside, outdoors I mean, because it stinks horribly and it's really not very nice to smell or to inhale. But it is very effective at cleaning off dirty surfaces. Yeah, so that's why I'm giving the CRT a washing with it. The next product you see, which is the alcohol in the middle, I'm going to use to wash off the CRT to make sure there are absolutely no greasy residues left. And then the third product is what we're going to use to replace the lost aqueduct. I'm trying to rid it of its old aqueduct layer, and to do that I'm using three tried and trusted methods. The first one, of course, is to use a very sharp surgical knife like this, okay, to flake the aqueduct off bit by bit, and that works, but it's rather slow. The second method, which is my least favorite, but which I did use, was to use pure ammonia to wash the CRT. The ammonia, just like the alcohol by the way, has a double function. First of all, it cleans off any greasy fingers residue off the glass, so that I'm sure the new aqueduct will have a proper substrate on which to hold. And the alcohol serves the same purpose. Now I must say that if you're going to work with either, and especially with the ammonia, I do advise you not to work indoors, okay? Do not work indoors or you might even faint. Ammonia is terribly strong product and it really takes you on your lungs, okay? So really don't use those two products outside. Now the third product, which I showed you but which I did not explain, I'll explain in a moment once I'm finished cleaning off the CRT. I managed to wash and scratch away most of the old Aquadag, and like I said, I use a cocktail of ammonia and pure methyl alcohol to clean off the old Aquadag, and what resisted I carefully removed with my sharp surgical knife. Now, like I said, there might still be a few tiny flakes left and right left on the CRT. But we're not trying to win a beauty contest here. We're trying to just provide for a good underlayer or substrate for the new Aquadag to get a good grip. And that's it. Anything else is really not very relevant. Okay, so I covered up all the parts that do not need to be covered by new Aquadag, and I used mainly painter's tape for that. So I covered up the old label of the CRT. I also covered up obviously the anode and the neck of the tube, as well as the front, just to be certain there would be no scratches made anywhere, or there would be no Aquadag sprayed anywhere where it shouldn't be. Okay, now this is what I'm going to use. It's a product I found on the internet, and it's produced by, as far as I can tell, well, a German company somewhere in Germany. Yes, Wuppertal. I've never been to Wuppertal, but that's where this product was manufactured. Now, they advertise it as a lubricant, but of course it isn't. At least not for our purpose, it is not. We're not going to use this as a lubricant, we're going to use this as Aquadag. So I guess what it needs to stick on properly is a very clean surface, and that's what we did. We cleaned the CRT, and now we're going to give the CRT one or maybe two layers of this stuff. The spray can has a rather wide nozzle pattern, so I don't need to be too far from the CRT, but well, relatively close enough so that I don't waste too much of this stuff, because it's rather expensive. There you go. Whew. It almost looks like soot. That's interesting. Okay. There we go. And there you go. So now we let it all dry. Okay, well, as you can see, I sprayed the graphite spray all over the screen, and it looks okay. It really looks okay. It looks clean, and it seems to cover every part of the screen that I wanted to cover, which is perfect. Now, just to show you that it does indeed do what it needs to do, I'm going to show you the conductivity of the layer I sprayed, and the best way to do that is with a multimeter. Okay, let's first check whether it works correctly. Yes, okay, so the multimeter works. So I'm going to measure on opposite sides of the CRT. Okay, so I'm going to measure here, and I'm going to measure on the other side of the CRT. Okay, here we go. Watch the meter. There you go. Almost 3.2 kilo ohms. Okay, if I do it over the wide side of the CRT, then it doesn't just survive the winter. 3.9 kilo ohms. Okay, so the graphite does what it needs to do. So now I'm going to remove the tape and see whether the result is what I hoped it would be. So here we go. Trying not to damage the aqueduct, of course, which is not as easy as it may sound. But okay, here we go. There you go. Sometimes these groups reach into the thousands. That's the label. Now, around the anode, let's see. Depending on a penguin's location in the huddle. Scientists have measured as high as 37 degrees centigrade in the heart of the group, which is up to 80 degrees hotter than on the outer edge. It had been thought that the penguins kept warm with all of this huddling tightly together. A recent discovery, however, let's be careful now. I don't want to damage the new aqueduct layer. And it looks reasonably nice too, that graphite layer. So here we go. There you go. This is the anode. Nice and clean. So that worked out fine. I might have to retouch a little bit here and there, but really the anode is completely clean, so that's a good thing. So now let's release the neck and see whether that survived. All the handling, I think it did, but let's make sure. Let's see now, where does the tape... Well, let's make a cut here. Now we know they can originate from any bird, in any position within the huddle. I have to be careful not to damage the coils. By a warm bird in the center, traveling outwards to cool down. There you go. Returns, so do the females, allowing the males to head out to sea. Okay. Now they can feed
and build up enough fat reserves for another grueling breeding season. It's here that another fantastic
Okay, here we go. Well, it looks okay.
The Emperor is the largest
Everything seems to have survived,
up to 38 kilograms.
but I really have to be careful not to cut into
Body fat
the coil, because that would be a real problem. You know,
to maintain it, they need to hunt. Diving longer and deeper.
damaging the deflection coils would set me back quite a bit. So, oh, I'm pulling on the wrong plastic.
Building up their
Hang on.
vital fat stores. But all that bulk comes at a price. And
Come on. Yeah, there you go.
how does a bird, the same weight as a baby,
There you go.
get itself back out of the
Yeah.
water?
Well, there you go. I made an inventory of all the parts that I'll need to reassemble the cabinet of the Sony. Now, obviously I'm not going to be rash and just start doing it, you know, just like that. I am going to do a kind of a dummy assembly first, which means that with all the parts that I have, and there are quite a few which I'm not showing. So for example, you also have the cleaned buttons, you have the front panel, you know, and the channel button. You also have the logo, which I still need to repair, by the way, but I'm in no hurry to repair the logo because, well, I can always mount that at the very end. So this is really not essential for reassembly. Okay, so, and then I also have the command panel, let's say, of the Sony. And okay, one tip here: if you have to clean a rough surface like this, and I think you can see it is rather rough, the best way, at least I found out, that the best way to clean something like this of dust and all sorts of particles and grease and you name it, is to use a stiff brush like this. So this is a pig hair brush, so the hairs are rather stiff, and it's a wide flat brush, as you can tell. And I just hold the piece in rather warm water, not hot water, okay, because this is plastic. Okay, so, and I put a little bit of mild detergent on this brush, and with this panel moist, which I had dipped into rather warm water, I would brush the whole surface with this stiff pig hair brush. And I would do several passes. I would even let the plastic panel soak a bit in the warm water. Now, after a while I dried it, and I still spotted a few spots that were not very clean, so I had to do it several times to wash off the grime of, say, roughly 50 years. That took a while. Now, the reason is also why I use soapy water with a mild detergent is that I did not want to take the risk to wash off the silver paint which you see on the surface of the legends, of the button legends. Yeah, you see ver, which means probably vertical, or from horizontal, BRT, which means brightness. Strangely enough, they don't use CNT for contrast, but they use pix. Go figure why. They use pix instead of CNT or CRT. And then vol from volume. Okay, so anyway, I cleaned this off with a brush like this. Actually, this brush. And I did the same thing with the buttons. I dipped the buttons, or rather I put the buttons in a jar like this with a little sieve inside. And I put some soapy water, very warm water, into this jar, and then put all the buttons you see here inside the jar, and say within the space of about half an hour I would open up the jar, rattle the buttons with the sieve like this a few times, then close it back up again and let it soak. And after half an hour they came out rather clean, as you can tell for yourselves. I also washed the antenna holder, although nobody will ever see it since it's mounted inside the chassis. But still, the part was loose, it was dirty, so I cleaned it anyway. Right, now before you start to tackle something like this, a reassembly job like this, I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with that tale where people say they needed to reassemble something, or they took apart something, and when they reassembled it they always found one or two extra screws which they couldn't place, or which they could place, but once the whole thing was already reassembled. So I suppose most people at that stage would not even bother to disassemble it again to place the screws where they were missing. So in order to avoid that kind of problem, what I do is a kind of dummy reassembly, which means that I look for the right screws and the right parts to reassemble the, in this case, the front of the TV, and mount back the CRT into the front, because you'll remember the CRT was mounted or fixed to the back of the CRT's front piece. But before I start working with the CRT, which is, let's face it, probably the most breakable part in the whole TV, I'm going to do a dummy reassembly, just to see whether I can figure out which screw goes where. I need to unwrap the front of the CRT, which out of precaution I had left wrapped with special painter's tape. I mean, special in the sense that this kind of tape can be used on top of existing paint. So theoretically, at least, you can pull it away without damaging the underlying paint. Now obviously I didn't use paint on the CRT. I used slip plate or graphite powder, if you wish, and as you can tell, the result is reasonable. Okay, it doesn't look not in the furthest on a regular paint job, right? It's just a superficial graphite powder with a not very strong binder product which binds it to the surface on which it lies. So I have to be a bit careful unwrapping this and also cleaning it, because I need to clean the front before I can put it back into its protective front cover. Yeah, it needs to be really clean, and for that I'm going to use two things. I'm going to use some Windex, which has a little bit of alcohol and ammonia in it, and it will do a terrific job cleaning off clear glass or clear plastic, but it has the disadvantage that it also takes off aquadag. So I need to be really careful with this. Once I've cleaned the front of the CRT with this, with a little bit of this, and I'm going to use a soft cotton t-shirt, an old soft cotton t-shirt to do that, I'm going to finish the job cleaning the front of the CRT with this. Now I really have no idea how they call this in English, but let me see. Okay, they call it glasses cleaning wipes. Yeah, well, let's call it that.
Some way of bringing it down on the remote. Transmitter's on the APC. It's wasted.
The bracket which holds the CRT to the front panel back on the collar or the neck of the CRT. And okay, a small warning here. when you put the collar back, you should make sure that this little plastic lip is above it, not underneath it. Frankly, I would have had the reflex of putting it underneath the collar, but it came like this, so I suppose this is the correct way to mount it. And it does sort of make sense to want to insulate the metal collar from the deflection yoke, which is right above it. Now, what I want to say is be careful when you mount it back, because the aquadag is really scratches easily. So you need to really be careful mounting it back. Also, there's no need to put a lot of tension on the ring, on the CRT cradle, by screwing this screw too hard. You can always you can see on the screw until where it is cored, until where it was screwed in at the factory. Now, I suppose you can make it a bit tighter if the CRT feels loose in the front of the cabinet. Now, this rubber band was put over the CRT and around the lip of the front cover, which sits on top of the CRT. Okay, I put back the cover. Obviously, I cleaned the cover as well, and I also tried to do a good job of it. And in fact, a little bit of dirt and some residue carbon came off of the lip of the CRT. So unfortunately for me, there are a few deeper scratches, not too obvious on the front of the cover, but that can't be helped. And since I don't have any polishing compound to polish it away properly, for the moment it will have to do. Right, so let's put back the rubber band which fits around it. Now, the rubber band has a dual function. First of all, it's there to keep the front cover to the CRT, obviously. But also, the rubber band makes that the CRT fits snugly inside the space on the front bezel of the TV. So you better make sure that it sits right around the whole CRT. Okay. Actually, I'm quite surprised the rubber band still has a bit of spring to it. I would have thought after 50 years this rubber band would be completely dead, but no, it's actually holding up quite well. Alright, so there we are. It fits snugly around the CRT. So now we can slide it back into the front. Now, this little bit of damage you see here was not caused by me. Obviously, at the factory, they put back they mounted the CRT into the front of the cabinet, but not properly. So I'll try to be a little bit more careful when I slide it back in. Alright, I fitted back the CRT inside the front cover of the cabinet. and it sits rather snugly. So if I carefully rotate it, okay, I have to be careful, I'm only using one hand. Well, you can tell that the CRT sits rather nicely inside the front bezel of the TV. Now you're looking at the bezel top down, okay? So anyway, I mounted the CRT back into the front bezel. Now I had to release the screw of the collar a little bit. As you can tell, I unscrewed it almost completely. And the reason why I did that is because I need to mount now the little feet which hold fast the CRT to the bezel, okay? And we're going to do that together so you get an idea of what needs to be done. Now, like I said, I mounted back the collar, but only loosely. Now, with the CRT were these little plastic feet and one screw. And you have one for the top, which is this one, and you have one for the bottom. Okay? And the function of these little feet is double. On the one hand, it holds the bracket which holds down the collar to the CRT, and it attaches it to the bottom part of the bezel, so here, okay? So that's exactly what I'm going to do. Now it also cradles the CRT. As you can see, it has a slant to it, okay? And the CRT also has a slant in its side. So you should put back the block like this. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I slide it over like this. There you go. And now, if you look at the bottom, you see there's a hole here, right here. And you should try to make the two coincide. Hang on. And that is a bit difficult to do, but it can be done. And you need to make both coincide so that the holes find each other. So that's what I'm going to do next. And I'm going to do the same thing, the same operation, let's say, on top of the CRT. Right, well, the CRT sits inside the front piece of the cabinet, and as you can tell, it worked out fine. I had a bit of work. Actually, to be quite correct, I had to, unfortunately, unmount the CRT once again because I had omitted to check whether the front plastic cover, you know, the protective guard in front of the CRT, was absolutely rigorously clean, and it wasn't. Of course it wasn't. There were some tiny flecks of carbon which had fallen inside the protective cover. And of course, in my haste to mount the CRT back, I had omitted to check that. So that's a golden tip for all of you who want to do the same thing. Before you mount back the CRT completely into the front bezel of the cabinet, make sure that the inside of the plastic cover and the front of the CRT are absolutely squeaky clean, because once you mount it back into the bezel like this, it's way much harder to get it out again without damaging it or scratching it or whatever. So the less times you have to remove it from the front bezel of the TV, the better it is. Now, one other golden tip I can give you is that you should indeed unscrew this almost completely. And by almost I mean you have to unscrew the screw until it barely sticks out from this piece. Okay, so the head of the screw is here on top of the CRT neck. The bottom is the foot or the leg of the screw, and you should unscrew it until it is almost unscrewed but not quite. So it should stick out perhaps 1/2 mil above this piece of the neck clamp. And the reason why is that the neck clamp should be loosely fitted around the CRT so that you can attach these legs, which are tied to the clamp, to the bottom and top of the bezel. You know, and if you tighten this screw too much, you'll never have enough play to move these legs sufficiently down so that you can screw them to the bezel. So only afterwards, when all is said and done and you've screwed fast the two legs of the CRT, so at the bottom and at the top, then you can tighten the neck ring. Now be careful when you do. This is strong glass, but it's not unbreakable. So if you're going to put too much tension on the glass, it might shatter. And since this is a CRT, it might even explode. Okay, so be careful. Do not put too much tension on the collar. I nearly forgot to show you a very interesting little detail, which is this. On the collar of the neck of the CRT, there are these two focusing magnets, which you can slide back and forth like this. Now, once they are in the right position, which is about here, you can lock them into place with this tiny screw here. So once you've set the focusing rings, you should tighten this little screw right here downwards like this. Don't have to do it too hard, like this is more than enough. So the screw is really fitted onto a spring, and by screwing it lower, or deeper I should say, this spring here into which it is screwed will, come on, focus. Yeah, the spring you see here will push the foot of the screw onto the focusing rings. therefore locking them into position by squeezing them to the neck of the whatchamacallit, the deflection coils, yeah, of the yoke. So this is the neck of the yoke. This is actually plastic, not glass. But you really don't need to put a humongous amount of tension on this screw. Just tighten it a few turns so that the rings are locked into place, and you see I can't move them any longer, and I just screwed the screw perhaps 2 or 3 mil down. So I thought I would show you that. Okay, I reconnected the CRT with the chassis, and I also reconnected the high voltage, and I think I can now connect up the chassis to the front piece, which will require at least 4 screws, and I think even 5 if you consider this one here as well. So yeah, but before we go that far, I also need to place back a few other parts, like for example the antenna holder, yeah, and the antenna. So I mounted back the antenna, which is held to the chassis with this plastic piece here, and I screwed in one screw here and another one which is holding down the metal base of the antenna to the front bezel with one screw here. Actually, you can't really miss, because as well the plastic piece as the metal base piece has a pin sticking out which fits right into a little hole next to it, like here. So it's really not that difficult, and besides, all the screws that hold the chassis to the front bezel are the same, so you can't really miss. I was so frustrated with the fact that I couldn't get the sound to work properly together with the image, that I decided to tinker a little bit more, despite the fact that I don't have the necessary equipment to do a proper alignment. I mean, my oscilloscope is out for the count, and I still don't have a sweep generator. Still, with the tools I have, my pattern generator and my multimeter and a few screwdrivers, I did manage to improve the sound. As you can tell. Unfortunately, the video still bleeds into the sound. If I can show you, well, you can tell that the video still bleeds into the sound, and I can only fix that by giving the TV a proper alignment, which, like I said, I just can't right now. Now, you see that I repaired the damage on this side, and I reassembled everything. I missed 2 original buttons for these two, but I guess with a little bit of looking around and all that, I can find 2 replacements for these, but there's no hurry. Also, this is the earphone jack, and it's not a standard 3.5 millimeter or 2.5 millimeter earphone jack. It's a more proprietary kind of jack with 2 pins. I don't have an earphone that fits this jack, but I guess, again, with looking around on the market, I could find one somewhere. It's not urgent, but if I find one, I'll certainly get it, just to make the collection complete. Now, this is the back, and the serial number is 9254, which seems to suggest that there were perhaps never more than a few 10,000 of this model being built and sold, which makes this kind of TV rather rare, I would say. But okay, there are quite a few models out there from Sony, I mean smaller models, which are probably even rarer than this one. Still, I'm quite glad I managed to revive it. But like I said, it's still not perfect, but until I have the right equipment, I can't do a lot better than what it is now. Now, this TV, you could argue, is a engineer's prototype, which was thrown onto the market as a proper sales model, okay? And you can tell it is an engineer's model or a prototype model, and I can almost see the three goals the engineers at Sony got when they were told to build this model. And the first goal was use off-the-shelf parts to build a marketable TV, and they did just that. As you've seen over the last few weeks when I posted videos, the chassis is built out of off-the-shelf parts, so capacitors, resistors, transistors, anything excuse me, they could get on the market. Oh, sure, they adapted a few parts to their own specific needs, but I guess all the parts were available on the market. Second goal was try to build a miniature TV, so try to make it as small as possible. And there again, they succeeded. They built a very, very small TV. So if you compare it to the size of my hand, well, this TV is really, really small. Okay, so they succeeded in that. Although I must say it's pretty heavy. I would hazard to say it weighs, close to 6 or 7 pounds. You know, so let's say 2.5 kilograms, which is 2.5, maybe 3 kilograms, which is really, really heavy for such a small TV. Okay, and the last goal they got from their bosses was probably try to make a TV which is easy to maintain or repair. And again, as you've seen in the episodes I posted the last few weeks, they did succeed in making it modular enough so that work on it, repair work or maintenance work, is rather easy. So there again they succeeded. However, this TV has a few drawbacks. The first one is its weight. It's really heavy, and for a portable TV, making something which is really heavy is never a good thing. But I guess there again they were hampered by the fact they used off-the-shelf models, and they also used a lot of metal, which always makes things a lot heavier. Secondly, the modular build is really nice if you have to maintain or repair it, but by adding bus connectors, you also add a lot of potential trouble to the design, yeah, because connectors, they can corrode, they can get damaged, they can oxidize, So adding a lot of specialized connectors to any design is always a potential for trouble. And lastly, the design is not what I would call the most attractive design. Okay, so it was truly an engineer who designed this and not a designer, an industrial designer. And although it is compact and everything, it's really not the most attractive design I've seen amongst all sorts of TVs that I've seen on the internet or elsewhere. Still, as a prototype design that made it to market, it is still a little gem.